So when he broke up with you, some qualities that you think are core to you, he saw
hmm
them as problematic and the reason that you two couldn't be compatible.
He made a decision based on my worst moments, and that was all that mattered. I felt like I was being judged for those. Like he said, it was too late, like for an apology, which I'm not sure I necessarily agree with because I think if you actually want to show up and do the work in a relationship, you will. And like life is hard. Life throws so many unexpected, unanticipated things. If you're not willing to like navigate through that with someone, then what's the point?
Welcome to Partners in Sublime, where we explore the teachings of depth psychology and Vedic philosophy to achieve the highest levels of personal growth and self actualization. Join me as we tap into the unconscious for intuitive guidance and creative direction. I'm your host, Shagun Chopra. Let's begin.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Partners in Sublime. Today's topic is very dear to my heart. We're going to talk about spiritual bypass. This topic became really important to me when I first learned this word, and I finally had the vocabulary to describe what I had seen all around me while I was growing up in India. Not to say that this phenomenon is limited to India or any particular spiritual community. I actually think it's quite universal. But what makes it so interesting to me is that it's this necessary pitfall along the spiritual path that we all encounter and we all don't recognize in the moment. So let's look at the original definition of spiritual bypass. This term was coined by John Welwood. He was a transpersonal psychologist based in San Francisco. And so he had this whole psychology training, and then he was part of a Buddhist Sangha, and he started to see that some people were trying to reach for these spiritual ideals without doing the basic psychological work first. So in some ways they were emotionally more stunted, and they were trying to reach for this next level of spiritual enlightenment and development. So after observing this tendency, John Welwood coined the term spiritual bypass and defined it as the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, unfinished developmental tasks, and psychological wounds. You read this definition and you think to yourself, wow, this must be a terrible thing. And I think that was Wellwood's initial idea as well. That was how I understood it in the beginning myself. But as he developed this idea, he came to see that, spiritual bypass is bound to happen. When we start on the spiritual path, there will be a time when we will get too fixated on it and sort of ignore some of the other work that we are meant to do as humans. But the idea is to try to bring ourselves back. So it's a necessary evil, mandated pit stop in the spiritual path, whatever you want to call it. And it's not something that we should look at with like, oh, this is such a bad thing, like no one should ever do that. But just like Wellwood, I came to that conclusion myself too. When I initially found this term, I was like, this is exactly what I've seen some family members doing. Anytime something difficult happens, they will be like, this is God's will, this was meant to be, this is my karma, and just use that to suppress any emotional expression. We do this in very small, insidious ways, even with kids. Like, I remember growing up, people in my family, if I was crying or hurt that a friend betrayed me, someone in the family would be like, it's okay, just forgive her, and just not allow me to feel like the healthy range of emotions that one is supposed to feel in response to things that happen in the world. And I've talked about the function of different emotions in the previous episode. So really, we are meant to feel them. We are meant to use that as a tool for self-inquiry and use that as fuel and fodder for the ultimate spiritual path we are trying to walk. The more I studied psychology, personal development, especially Jung's work, which is so good at helping us confront all the stuff that we had pushed aside in order to be accepted in society. And sometimes it's about being accepted in spiritual society. I felt as though I had crossed a threshold, and I used to have a rigid spiritual persona and was committing spiritual bypass in the past, and I no longer do it anymore. A very binary state. But really, I feel like this phenomenon ebbs and flows, and it goes in circles. Sometimes you're doing it in one aspect of life but not the other, and you continue to, just like with so many things in our unconscious, unearth different ways in which you may have been bypassing your own inner psychological work, whether it's in the name of spirituality or something else. For me, a big part of this realization came from doing research work as part of my doctoral program in clinical psychology. We are all asked to create an original piece of research as a condition for graduation, the one that we write our dissertation on. And I, of course, knowing and loving this topic and being very much into the psycho-spiritual space, picked spiritual bypass for my research. I interviewed different people who had varying levels of spiritual bypass as measured by an instrument, and I used that to conclude what spiritual bypass feels like in a real experiential way, not in a clinical way or in a measurable way, but what is the lived phenomenological experience of spiritual bypass. When this research began, or when I started conceiving it, I had slightly myopic views on spiritual bypass. I thought I would encounter people who would be very obviously ignoring their inner experience. They would try to create this false facade of peace and like, I'm okay, God has got me, the universe has got me, I'm taken care of. And I would be able to pick up on this unsettling energy underneath. So I expected the phenomenon to be very in my face, so to say. But what I found instead, and this is the outcome of, some good research where the researcher itself starts to question their perspective and enhances their knowledge of the phenomenon. You don't want to go in with this preconceived understanding. So I tried to be really open-minded, and I was like, let me see what I actually discover here. And I realized that the phenomenon was actually a lot more subtle. I thought people would have this really hurting emotional experience and they would be trying to mask it up through spiritual ideas. But what I saw instead was that the experience of spiritual bypass offered people such genuine peace. It was this place where they could rest from the chaos of transformation. Something difficult happens in their life and it's hard physiological, psychological work to go through these things. And these people found a refuge in spirituality. And this refuge is like a temporary shelter. It's not meant to be your permanent home. It's like a little place along the way where you pitch a tent and sleep through the night because you're so tired from the journey. And then you wake up, you get out of the tent and you pick yourself back and you keep going. And the metaphor I used in my research to describe the phenomenon was that of a caterpillar, cocoon, and butterfly. So you're the caterpillar, takes a lot of energy to become a butterfly, and you rest in a cocoon that you weave around yourself. You just shut yourself out and rest from the chaos of transformation. And then you move ahead and you become the butterfly. The problem is, if you are in that state of cocoon and you never choose to become the butterfly, you are leaving your entire potential, the reason you were born, on the table. You are continuing to be in that tent you pitched by the side of the road when you were tired and never going toward the summit that you were meant to go to, that you were meant to climb. So in that sense, spiritual bypass can stop you from reaching the ultimate spiritual state that you always wanted. And the funny thing is, almost nobody recognizes their spiritual bypass in the moment. If that tired traveler is resting in a tent by the side of the road and you were to walk up to them and tell them hey, I think you're kind of missing the point of your journey, that person will shoo you off and be like, you have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea how worn out I am. I need to be here. I need to rest. This is my refuge. So that is not how people understand that they might be using spirituality to sort of get off their path of progress. But when this person eventually, due to different circumstances, leaves the tent, then they can see what was going on. Then they can see that, I'd actually stopped progressing during this time because I was resting. And it's okay to rest, to gather energy and ammunition for the psychological work that lies ahead. But that rest cannot be permanent. So most of the participants in my study, they recognized spiritual bypass years after, sometimes decades after it had happened. They were raised in, churches or religious institutions where they were taught not to question anything. They were part of spiritual groups where it wasn't okay to feel grief or anger or shame. And it took some good teachers who could teach them how to walk the spiritual alongside the psychological. And it took other experiences that jolted them out of their prior state and made them see, oh, this is what I was doing. If you're listening to this episode, my guess is that if you were actually in spiritual bypass, none of what I'm saying is even going through. Because that state itself creates such a refuge that almost nothing can penetrate that cocoon, and you're in that web of safety, of spiritual guidance, whatever practice or faith it is that you're leaning to, and there's no room for anything to come through. But if you're listening to this and you're like, you know what, I have done that in the past, or I can see people in my family who are doing that right now, or people in my friend group who are doing that right now, or I can recognize the different intensities of it, like a small little bypass here and there versus being completely secluded and not participating in psychological growth at all, then I hope this episode gives you the vocabulary to describe your experience and the trajectory of what your path might look like. And to illustrate the concept, as always, I have a coaching session that I'm going to play. This one is with someone I'll call Ava. She had a breakup less than a week before we met and recorded this session, and it was a tremendously difficult and unexpected experience for her. And yet when she showed up in session, she was actually quite calm. So I want you to listen to this session because I think it demonstrates what that cocoon state looks like. And then on the other side of it, we can talk about what happens next, what comes after the cocoon. So listen on, and I will see you in just a bit. Conversations on Partners in Sublime are for educational purposes only and do not constitute medical or psychological advice or treatment. Please consult a licensed professional for any mental health concerns. Hi Ava, welcome. How are you doing and what is feeling alive for you today?
I think I'm feeling a bunch of different emotions. I think what feels alive is grief, just given the most recent change. Mixed emotions.
Yeah, where's the grief coming from?
The recent change, I guess, was in a relationship with someone. It wasn't for a long period of time, but I think, at least for me, it carried depth because parents had also gotten involved. So just going through the emotions that come with it.
Were you guys having issues or was the breakup just sudden and catch you out of left field?
I think it definitely caught me off guard. Didn't see it coming. I think there was a reason that I was given, but then there's the real reason. But ultimately, it just boiled down to like his dad wasn't okay with us being together. And I think the person that I was with, he like realized the weight of what he was taking on, and probably decided that it wasn't for him.
Mm.
But it was just unfortunate because I think we try to have these conversations like several times, but yeah, at least the story that I was told was that it'll be fine. He had it, but it's okay. I mean, it happens. Like, I think he just underestimated his capacity to take this on with his dad.
So he had assured you that it would be okay when the time came to involve the parents, and he wasn't quite expecting the pushback and didn't know it'd be so hard to fight it.
I'm not sure entirely what transpired because a lot of what happened was between them. I felt like I wasn't in the journey in terms of what was happening between them. But I suspect that, yeah, it probably just got too hard for him to like take that journey with his dad.
So is the most hurtful part then the fact that he didn't stand up for you to his parents?
I think the hurtful part is two things. One, yeah, I wish I was more in the know in terms of how he was actually feeling about this because if it was really hard, I would have liked to have known that. And then I think the second most hurtful thing is, at least when he chose to end things, we ended up having a big conflict while he was traveling. And then he came back and decided to end things. So the story he told me was that it had to do with the conflict. And I think some of the things that he was telling me while blaming conflict were extremely hurtful because it really made me question me as a person and like my identity. Because I was like, am I really like that? Like, is that really the version of me?
Mm-hmm.
But I think he also came to the table not willing to have a conversation. So it was like the door was shut. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's those two things.
So when he broke up with you, some qualities that you think are core to you, and maybe you even like that about yourself, he saw
Hmm.
them as problematic and the reason that you two couldn't be compatible.
I think so. I feel like he judged me for, he made a decision based on my worst moments. And that was all that mattered. I felt like I was being judged for those. And it's not to say that like I don't have an ego. I'm willing to show up. I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to like admit fault. By no means am I perfect. I fully acknowledge like the role that I had to play. I'm also human. I'm also like imperfect. Like I think all humans are work in progress, right? All I can do is like offer to do the work. Beyond that, it's out of my control. Like he said, it was too late like for an apology, which I'm not sure I necessarily agree with, because I think if you actually want to show up and do the work in a relationship, you will. And like life is hard. Life throws like so many unexpected, unanticipated things. If you're not willing to like navigate through that with someone, then what's the point? But it's fine. I think part of it was also that, yeah, maybe he didn't know me and he didn't know that I am capable of change, and he chose to make a decision based off like the data that he had and the information that he had. So it's fine.
Well, clearly it's not fine. So, but I know that we kind of have to tell that to ourselves when we are trying to, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so hurtful to go through a breakup. It is arguably one of the hardest things emotionally that one goes through. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just imagining that somebody you love and care for and potentially were, you had your parents involved, so I'm guessing you're on the path to potentially getting married,
Mm-hmm.
looks at you, judges you for your worst moments.
Mm-hmm.
It carries such a deep wound, and I'm suspecting that it's not just the wound of this time, but it also brings up any past wounds of similar nature that you may have had.
It's interesting because 2 years ago, around this time, I had ended a relationship with someone, and as I'm going through this journey, I'm realizing how much of like what I learned through that experience I'm able to apply. So it doesn't necessarily make me think back about that relationship particularly, but it's been making me think back to, okay, how did I show up for myself during that time period of my life? And what are the things that I learned during that time period? And how can I apply those to what I'm experiencing now? I felt like I had to force my emotions and suppress them and process them within a certain time frame. But I don't think emotions work that way. I think you just have to experience them and you have to like be real with them. Like, okay, if you feel sad for whatever 3, 4, 5 months, you feel sad for 3, 4, 5 months. Like I can try to lie to myself as much as I can and want to, but it is inevitably going to show up if
Mhm.
I'm around other people or if I'm like trying to go on dates. Like it shows in the way that you show up for yourself and for other people. So, but this time it feels like my emotions feel stronger now, but I'm not trying to suppress them. But I think it's better that I like actually process this and let those emotions go through my body. And then I think it's always easy to like be in this position and like blame someone else, I think, for everything that happened. But something else I learned from like the last time is I think it helps to show up with compassion, not just for yourself, but also for the other person. Like it's a little bit harder now just given the recency of the event, but my hope is to get to a point where like I'm trying not to have negative thoughts or opinions about someone that aren't accurate, because yeah, while that might make my experience easy now, I think it can come back in ways later. It makes it harder now because I don't want to villainize someone, but
Mhm.
I think it's better for him, for me to just like go through the experience and have compassion for both of us in a healthy way. I think last time I just chose um unhealthy. By unhealthy, I don't mean like, partying or like going out and stuff like that. I feel like I tried to like force my emotions to be a certain way and didn't really like sit with them. So yeah, those are things that I think I'm trying to do, that I've taken away from the last experience, that I'm trying to do differently this time. Though it makes them harder.
It
It makes it
does.
harder.
Yeah. I feel like, we worked together in the past, so I see such a
Hmm.
shift, and you being able to welcome your emotions, as uncomfortable and as painful as they might be,
Hmm.
especially at a moment where it would make it a lot easier to move on if you were to villainize him.
Hmm.
Like that's a real sign of psychological maturity, and it's okay to be the human and be like, but why do I have to do it in this way? Because this is
Yeah, yeah.
so much harder. Yeah.
For sure. And it's not to say that I don't have those moments. I have plenty of those moments. I'm like, why do I have to go through this? It seems unfair. But I think, again, I guess, human beings aren't perfect and neither am I. But all I can do is like try to be the version of myself that I want to be.
Yeah, and like, it takes time to metabolize grief and feel it. The breakup's fairly recent. If there's the version of you that found out the news and was totally shocked, and then there's the version of you that's processed it and this is in the past and
Hmm.
no longer carries emotional charge, you recognize that you're not going to get there in a day. You might have to
Hmm.
sit with that for a while. But where do you think you could get today?
I think where I'd like to get to is like genuine compassion for the other person, and then genuine compassion for myself. I have a tendency to have like a skewed perception of myself sometimes. And when I say skewed, like skewed negatively,
Mm.
but I'm really trying not to do that this time. So I think if I can get to a point where I can show up authentically, it doesn't have to be like extremely optimistic. Like I don't have to hype myself up. I can just acknowledge like the reality of like what I bring to the table and also accept that I have flaws. So I think if I can get to a point where I can have compassion and show and be authentic and also have compassion for the other person for whatever they went through, that would be good. But I think that'll take time.
Yeah, I'll try to put it in my words, but correct me because, we're figuring this out together. What I'm hearing is that as you process this breakup, you want to maintain this level of self acceptance where you're not processing it from the lens of, you know, yeah, I'm so great, and, hyping yourself up and I deserve better, or from the lens that you've done in the past where you're like, oh, must be something wrong with me, maybe I'm not worthy, or some version of that negative self
Hmm.
esteem. But from this place of acceptance of like that you're a human, you have these so-called good and bad traits. And
Hmm.
none of this processing means that you have to change anything about yourself, but you want to just accept yourself as the person who is having this experience. What is something that's helped you in the past as you try to accept yourself more and have more compassion for yourself?
I think two things. One is the support system that you have. Like I mentioned, my mine tends to like skew negative sometimes, and I need like reality checks and people around me to be my voice of reason, at least immediately after I've experienced something emotional. And then the second thing is having faith in something like a higher power besides yourself. I come from like a very spiritual family. And I think along the way, I kind of lost my not entirely lost my faith, but I think I wasn't leaning into it as much, probably like 5, 6 years ago. But more recently, I think in the last like 2 or 3 years, I've been leaning into that a little bit more.
Hmm.
And that's been extremely helpful because it's almost it's almost cathartic, because how much control do you really have anyways? Like you can do everything right in life and things can still not work out. And how can, like, no one can explain that. There's just, you just can't. And I think there's like feels makes me feel a bit free when I'm just like, okay, I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know why I'm experiencing these things. Maybe it's karma or whatever. I don't know. But I think having faith and leaving it to a higher power that, yeah, things will work out. All you can do is like do your part.
So I love that you have that to anchor yourself during this process, and try as you might, your best anchors will fail and you will have those moments. So, being kind to yourself through that is important too. I feel like right now you're tapped into this very good headspace as you're having perspective on this breakup, and
Hmm.
and knowing that you will probably oscillate and,
Hmm.
maybe, be curled up on the floor and like having a moment. Maybe I'm
Hmm.
projecting my own breakups on you.
No, no, that's definitely how it's been.
Yes, yes. So I think maybe now's a good time to just like record a little message for yourself that is going to experience that inevitably. And you don't have to literally record it, but just to cement this way of being, this state in your mind. Maybe we
Hmm.
can do a little exercise to do that if you're open to it. Okay, so just close your eyes and be comfortable. I think everything you've said in the last few minutes shows me that you are in touch with that guidance from your higher self as you navigate something very difficult. I think our hope right now is to cement and anchor this wisdom so that you can access it more readily, even when another part of you just wants to, give up and blame and feel really sorry for yourself. And we must allow both these parts to exist. So for this one, I'd like to imagine the feeling of trusting in your faith as one color and in one place in your body. Where do you feel it?
My heart,
In what color?
white.
I want you to keep experiencing this white expansiveness in your heart. And I want you to assign, if you like, a symbol to it
Hmm.
or an image that maybe flashes in your mind as I'm talking, or what this sense of peace represents to you.
The image that popped up is my family follows a spiritual guru, so that was the image that popped up.
Yeah, stay with that image and just continue to let your body, let your mind experience the sense of peace that comes from knowing that you're always guided and you're always surrounded by love no matter what happens in life. If you like, you can now assign a word to this inner experience, this white expansiveness in your heart, this image of your guru, a word that you can say to yourself when you want to evoke this feeling of peace, of everything's going to be fine in you.
Egoless love is what comes to mind.
Egoless love.
Hmm. Like love with like no strings attached.
Where do you think that love is coming from if it's not coming from the ego?
Mm, I think from the people around me, and also like whoever you believe to be God.
So you're experiencing yourself as a conduit of love that's kind of all around you, and you're channeling it with no expectation of it coming back to you from the same pathway because it's all around you anyway. It's such a wonderful place to go to. It's like cradling in like the divine lap, and whenever you feel ready, you can take a deep breath, exhale, stretch your body, open your eyes. How did that feel?
Peaceful.
Yeah, I felt the peace too. You were just like so zen and quiet, calm as you were doing that. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for listening to Ava's session. Before I say anything about it, I want to ground myself in my own heartbreak experience. We've all been that person who's turned to a friend and say, just move on already, or do this or that, or he or she doesn't deserve you. But we all know when it comes to our own heartbreaks, they can feel life ending. They can be so painful and bring a lot of sadness and anger, disappointment, feelings of being betrayed, feelings of being hurt, and sometimes just hopelessness that we will never find love again. I had one heartbreak just as I was getting ready to move from India to the US. I was with someone, we had planned to be in a long distance relationship. And he was also going to move to the US shortly after me. And for my last month in India before moving, I had planned a month of stay in a yoga ashram in the Himalayan foothills because I thought that would be good grounding for me before I moved. And our breakup, which was totally unexpected for me, happened a couple days before I was going there. I cried a lot in those 2 days. And then as I was on the train to go to the yoga ashram, I told myself, this is going to be a life-changing experience for me. I have so much to look forward to. I'm hurting so bad. Instead of ruining this whole month thinking about this person, let me just switch my phone off. I sent my mom a text saying that I will not be reachable for a month. And I told myself that I will fully throw myself into this spiritual immersion process. And it was such a good decision at the time. I was really able to go really deep with my spiritual practice. I was hurting, so because of that I was seeking, because when we're in so much pain, that's when we're really looking for an antidote to how we're feeling. And after that phenomenal experience, I came back, immediately left for the US, and carried that energy with me. Looking back now, again, nobody knows this in the moment, but looking back, I feel like I did not fully grieve this relationship. And that grief would come up in different ways through the rest of my time. And eventually I met somebody while I was at school, and we got married a couple years later. When that marriage ended in divorce, also very unexpectedly, I felt as though I was feeling the cumulative grief of all the heartbreak that I'd ever had, and then some. And this time I did not stop myself from feeling that grief, that emotional reaction. And this time, contrasting that with that previous breakup, I was filled with so many emotions and I just let them all come on me. I grieved for months and months, and just when I thought it was over, it would come back again, and it just would keep going in cycles. I'm saying all this to say that when we meet someone who's just had a relationship get over, you don't know where they are in that cycle. They're going to go through these mini cycles where some days are terrible and some days are okay, and they'll be woven in this like larger process of healing and recovering. So I felt that Ava for our session could have shown up in many ways. She could have been bawling her eyes out and feeling really sad and hopeless. She could have been really mad and feeling betrayed by the person that she was with. Or she may have this sense of like, yes, this ended, but I'm going to be okay. Something bigger, higher is guiding me and giving me strength. And all of those are very valid expressions of the process of grief that ensues after we lose something that is dear to us. Now, the problem would be if this state continued and it prevented her from experiencing all her emotions fully to the point where she can metabolize them and make meaning of what happened. We all go through suffering, and it's intended to move us toward the growth that our soul has undertaken to seek in this lifetime. And we will miss the point of that suffering if we refuse to engage in the transformation that comes from the suffering. And needing a rest from this transformation is completely okay. Maybe this is just one of those days where Ava is resting, where she's felt too much in too short a time and needs a place of refuge. She's in the cocoon, she's in that tent by the side of the road. And maybe the next day she will feel more again and go through and express and fully accept everything that arises in her as a result of this experience. And to that extent, this is all okay. This is all normal. This is how the spiritual path unfolds. But just hypothetically, if we go into a scenario where this piece is so dear, so tempting for her to stay with, that she doesn't feel her emotions at all, that she continues to use her spirituality to not indulge in processing her emotions, that is when she's sending all those of grief, of anger, pain, hurt, sadness, hopelessness in her shadow. What happens when things go in the shadow? They get out of our conscious awareness. We forget that they exist. They continue to linger there, and they continue to strengthen there, gain energy there, and then they erupt. So it's totally possible that something might happen in her life that then causes this eruption later, versus her having to process all this in the time that it is actually arising without suppressing it in a healthy manner to let it move through her. I chose this session specifically for spiritual bypass because I, and maybe many of you, have this assumption that spiritual bypass is just devastatingly empty, that it just makes us into these religious spiritual robots who have no feelings and we're just constantly lying to ourselves. But that's not how it feels like. In the moment, it feels like a very genuine sense of peace. It is almost necessary, because if you're so worn out on your transformation journey that you can't even progress, isn't it better that you take rest and refuge in something that you know recharges you, gives you strength, and replenishes you? But to make that promise to yourself that the next time you feel anything that is difficult, that doesn't feel as good as this little refuge you have, you will take that brave step of facing it, of letting all your emotions come to the surface without needing to stay in that refuge the whole time. If there is someone in your life who is currently in that refuge state, the first thing I'd want you to do is to let them be there. Maybe they need that rest. But if you truly feel that that refuge state is taking too long and is unproductive and is not helping them on their spiritual journey, then there are a few ways in which you can introduce little piercings in the cocoon so they can see what lies ahead of them, that path to becoming the butterfly. You may invite them to go to a totally different environment so that they have some distance from this refuge and they can see their life in a different way. If you are really close with them and you think that they care about what you have to say, you might even tell them that you are experiencing them in a way that's different from how they're experiencing themselves, forcing their mind to wrestle with these two different polarities where they think they are at absolute peace and you think that they are numb or not engaging with them the way you used to, that you can't feel their love or you can't feel their care or anything that might be different about them as a result of them staying for a prolonged period in this cocoon. You can offer them a non-judgmental space so that even their worst thoughts and feelings that they don't want to admit to anyone, not even themselves, have room to come out should they choose to. What you don't want to do is go at them directly and tell them, hey, I think you're spiritual bypassing. It's high time you get over it and do the actual work. Because the cocoon is built in a way that those things cannot pierce through, because nobody recognizes spiritual bypass in the moment by someone directly pointing it out to them. The recognition comes from this separation, this distance, and that's what you want to create. And if you feel like what I'm saying applies to you, maybe it's time that you too leave the restful cocoon and just take on this bold, brave life that we are all meant to live and learn from. Your spirituality will always be there, and you're not going to lose it just because you engage in psychological work. That's all I have for you today. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for being my partner in Sublime today. I hope you enjoyed diving into the unconscious with me. To ask a question or get coached on the show, visit shagunchopra.com/ask or click the link below. See you next time.